Ow. Hello Internet, I'm Oliver Worley from Icarus's Workshop, and I wanted to talk today about D&D, or more specifically, my D&D. What I do for my D&D game, and why mine should not be followed in any... And why mine should not be followed in any way unless you're as arrogant as me in terms of being able to balance combat and things. Basically, this is a bunch of my own homebrew combat rules that I use to in my own games to great success, but that I don't think are very valid for other people's games just because of the style that I run and the how difficult it is for new DMs to run combat. Now you've got to understand, yes, I'm 18, but I've also had 3 years experience. I've watched a bunch of things, and I spend a ridiculously high amount of time understanding how to run stories and balance things. So while I might be incredibly young, I know what I'm doing. Or at least I think I do. I'm arrogant enough to think I am. I do. So just bear that in mind when you're making these sort of judgments about my own my rules. If you want to follow them, be my guest, but you'd be mad to try unless you've got a very specific theme in mind. So yeah, my homebrew rules, I feel like a number of them should be clumped together for this sort of combat breakdown, because they a lot of them need to be considered together. And so maybe I'll make notes and get back to you in about 3 seconds once it's all done. And through the power of editing, I am back here a few seconds since I left you. Whatever. Power of editing, I like it. So, right now I've got four or five rules that are needed to be considered together. Now you've got to understand, the games I play are very, very story focused. We can go sessions without a piece of combat, and so when combat does come up, I've got a very strong sense of this is what I want. I want certain things to be achieved. I don't roll random encounters. If they meet someone on the road, it's always going to be important for either character progression, progressing the story, or explaining some sort of lore that my players want to know or don't understand. There's always a purpose that I introduce to it. And so the few combats I have, I need to feel significant, and I need my players to feel like any successes were theirs and any failures were theirs. Now, the way I do that is by removing as much chance as I can, or rewarding good play, punishing bad, and making dice less significant, or at least the randomness of dice. Essentially, being able to build consistency through good roll, good choices, and be purely reliant on chance in bad decisions. So here they are. And arguably the most significant rule that I introduced is a flanking crit rule that comes in essentially 2 points, with ranged weapons and melee weapons. With melee weapons, because unlike other DMs out there, I think flanking needs to be buffed rather than nerfed. Don't tell me why, Jacob on XP level 3. I understand exactly why you do what you do, but my encounters tend to include a large enough number of people that flanking is not easy, even if you're fighting a BBEG, which I'll probably impose some sort of immunity to this rule on. But even if you're fighting like a big creature, I'd usually put minions in just to deal with that sort of flanking issue. But essentially flanking crit. So in melee, when you're flanking a target, so essentially each person has 2 armor classes. Whatever armor class they would have normally, their dex plus their armor plus whatever other bonuses apply. And then another one, which is that armor class plus their proficiency. Now, anytime the target is caught out of cover from a ranged attack or flanked by a melee, and that hit gets above their second higher armor class, the one with their proficiency bonus, the attack is a crit. Basically, it means you can crit a commoner standing out in the open with no armor on a 12 or higher. It means that proficiency bonus plays some sort of role in defense, essentially protecting you from crits. And it means armor is more valuable because, standing out in the open is something that armor can now protect you from. A knight whose armor class is 25, 27 for the crit bonus. It doesn't really matter that they're stood out in the open. It doesn't change anything about how often they'll be crit. You still need a natural 20 to hit them. That sort of thing. But the reason I do this is it really incentivizes not getting caught out of cover or flanked and catching enemies out of cover and flanked. It really makes movement valuable. It also means when the cleric wants to get a spell in range, they have to actually decide whether they take a step out of that cover and expose themselves for the spell, or whether they stay behind. Oftentimes, I watch a lot of Critical Role or other things, and oftentimes I'll see a bunch of the backline characters just stood out in the open, launching spells, not really doing anything with their movement. And I don't like that. I think movement should be much more valuable than it is. Basically, buffing monks a bunch, because, monks need it, obviously. But, the idea is that it makes tactical combat more appealing, and because my games rely on few combats, I want my players to feel rewarded through good tactics or punished through bad, and as such, this is a good way of dealing with both situations. So that's the first of the 5 rules of this sort of junk. And the second one is double cover. Essentially, 3/4 cover is now 10 armor class, and half cover is 5. So not exactly double, but just new numbers. And the sharpshooter feat only, rather than ignoring all cover, it reduces cover by 1 type. So in 3/4 cover, the armor class, you still gain +5 armor class, but in half cover, sharpshooter functions, as it normally would. It nerfs sharpshooter from being overpowered to being okay. It's still pretty good. And it also means that that finding a good position and getting the enemy out of a good position are other things you weigh up and debate and think about. Now, in many cases, the 2 rules that I've said, the flanking crits and the double cover bonus, could be difficult to remember. I mean, the flanking crits isn't too difficult. On all my monster stat sheets, I just write 2 armor classes, and every time I look at the stat block, I see the 2 armor class and I remember. So it's easy enough to remember, and my players have the same thing written down. They can keep track of that sort of information relatively easily, and so you're reminded of it every time you make an attack or receive an attack. The double cover rule is likewise, because of the importance of flanking and all that, and getting cover. Often people, whenever I roll to hit, it's always on people's minds that they chose the cover for a reason, and they remember. Essentially, because of the themes of the game, the rules are constantly reminded, because that's exactly why you sought this point and why the enemies are in that point. Sharpshooter is easy enough to remember once you remember the cover rule. It's just important that you make sure rules are easy enough to remember. Oftentimes there are rules that have new tables that you've got to roll on certain situations, and what I found is they're very easy to forget. About, just because it's inherent to, it's not inherent to the game, and as such it doesn't play on that inherence to the game, and as such it's easy to forget. But also, I just don't like rolling on tables. That feels like adding chance, but I've sought to reduce it. It might not seem like that by adding crits and adding another variable, but you seek crits and they become far more likely. A crit is something that you seek now, rather than just a lucky happenstance. That's how it actually deals with the chance situation. Even so, I've got 2 more rules of this little block before I move on to the next sort of block. So that's exhaustion on 0 hit points, which is already a brutal rule on itself. Many people have stated as such. Luke Hart definitely mentioned how difficult it is, and not one too long ago either. But other people have mentioned it all over the place. It's tough, and I decided to introduce an even tougher rule, and that's exhaustion on crits. Yep, you get an exhaustion point whenever you take a crit. Now, combined with my flanking crits rule, okay, it means that you can, low-level players can target and kill high-level creatures with clever positioning and tactics if they're seeking these crits. It also means that a level 20 fighter with ridiculous armor class can't just walk into 200 archers and kill them all because he's got so many hit points and damage reduction. A couple of lucky arrows and he's dead, just like I feel like it would be in real life. Now, they could be able to take on 200 if they came at him one at a time, but together when they're swarmed, not so much. Essentially, it adds the value to the swarm, which, you know, action economy was always important in D&D, but I've always found that it's easy enough to kind of get round with just positioning and stuff. And so this just means that it just makes swarms feel ridiculously lethal and worth fireballing like 4 or 5 of them together rather than waiting for 20 or 21 of them together. You know, that sort of thing. I like it. It's worked. It is ridiculously brutal. I was playing a game with my new campaign I was playing a short while ago, and my players got to the 4th level of exhaustion in a single combat just because of poor tactics. It taught them a lot, and since then they have been far more considerate about their tactics, and they feel far more rewarded when they get through a combat without an exhaustion point, because they feel like they played it well. Now, I would say that exhaustion crit rule does not apply if the target is behind cover or not flanked. So it only applies if the flanking crit rule, if it comes from one of those flanking crits. But it's still harsh and still important to consider. But yeah, so yeah, they're essentially my most brutal rules that I introduced to the game, and they are brutal. So if you're considered doing them, you've got to have the right themes in mind. Players get my players. If I had a combat every session and these rules applied every session, they would spend a lot of time trying to recover, a lot of time, and that can end up not being particularly fun. And so by having it every so often, it makes the combat feel even a simple combat between goblins or guardsmen can feel tense and dramatic even at like level 5 or 7 or 10, you know, because of the cost essentially that's there. And so and it just fits the theme. I like my players fighting against weak enemies and feeling like those enemies are tough. I like them fighting against town guards and town guards feeling like they could kill the players if the players had not done so many clever things. I like my players to actually waste a powerful, or not waste, but spend a powerful spell on a non-powerful enemy because they need to get rid of them. A lot of this is influenced through XCOM 2, and I've always liked it in XCOM where you're perfectly okay with wasting your one-time ability that does 32 points of damage on a guy that has 4 hit points for no other reason than you just don't want him to get an attack. I want that same sort of a feeling in my game because my players can be very stingy with, you know, the abilities that they have and the spells that they have, and I want the understanding of combat to be this kind of, you are a small party fighting off against a world, basically. You are not superheroes. You are not, you know, it's not traditional D&D. That's all it is. So they're the main bulk rules. However, I do have a couple of others that I also use for no other reason than it helps deal with the limitations that these rules provide. Obviously, the cover rule and the crit rule can be very, very difficult to overcome if you're in a bad situation, and so I like giving even more options. In D&D, I think anyone who's played for any reasonable amount of time has looked at Molotov cocktails, has looked at Alchemist Fire, has looked at Pocket Sand, and always thought, let's get some, and yet in combat the 1d8 plus 4 from your longsword is always better, and so you never do it. I don't like that. So what I did is essentially invented a bunch of gritty conditions. I made a couple of new conditions up, and I ramped up some of the more like lackluster ones, just to make the, you know, deciding to throw a Molotov cocktail at an enemy in cover because now they're burning, and I want them to be burning because burning will significantly help us. I want that idea. I want you to decide, oh yeah, let's throw a Thunderstone here because I want them to be disorientated for their next round of combat. I want the ability to control the battlefield. I want you to control that enemy can't move anywhere because he's hit by a Tanglefoot bag, and actually being trapped is, worth it now. And so I just buffed a bunch of these conditions. I'll probably make another video about specifically the gritty conditions that I have. But they work well. Now, I haven't really had the time to test them thoroughly because it was a rule that I introduced for my new campaign, and my new campaign has only been going on for 3 sessions, and we've only had 2 combats, one of which was kind of spare at the moment, and the other one, the players are all brand new and getting to know each other. They haven't had time to think about these sort of things. So, I haven't really had the opportunity to field test. Though, all I can say is if the players overuse it, make sure the enemies overuse it as well, and then provide some sort of opportunity to counter. Always provide an opportunity to counter or avoid these nasty situations, just because you're not here to kill your players, you're here to make your players feel like they've earned a reward for succeeding. So yeah, gritty conditions, I'll go into more detail of them later, but I still have 2 more rules, or 1 more combat related rule, another one that is just integral to my game that I feel like I'm just going to add in. So the combat one is improving tripping, disarming, and grappling. Essentially, right now in 5th edition combat, you attempt to trip or disarm. Even if you succeed, they just get up, grab their weapon, and continue fighting, and you literally just waste your damage for the round. I don't like that. I want to feel like tripping and disarming and grappling are actually things worth doing. And so, what I allow is a reaction attack whenever someone attempts to, pick up, get up from being tripped, or get up from being prone while within your reach, or while trying to pick up an item while within your reach, or use an item while within your reach. That includes potions and other things that even if they're standing. And when you take your opportunity attack, you have a choice. You can either simply cause damage, or you can stop them from doing the action within your space for the rest of the round. So for example, let's say they want to drink a potion. You can take a reaction attack and say, and if you hit, you can say, okay, you just can't drink a potion for the rest of the round. Rather than, I'm just going to cause damage, or just allowing them to drink a potion. Still use your reaction, but it means people can use their reactions far more frequently, assuming they want to do these conditions. I think it's going to be more powerful at the early levels, when you can trip someone, they're tripped, and now you can just stop them from getting up with, each round as your party hammers into this enemy. But when you've got enough enemies on the field, tripping up someone while being a benefit, you can't do like a trip tank. You can't just constantly trip him up and let your party hammer into him because you've got other people to deal with. Useful for one-on-ones and other sort of singular encounters, but not so powerful for, when there are numbers of enemies and stuff. It essentially is diminishing returns in both the later levels and the increased enemy count, but still worthwhile. And it just gives an importance to these decisions that wasn't originally there. In terms of grappling, I want to improve it, but I don't really know how. A reaction attack every time they fail to attempt to break out of your grip or something. I don't know. Make it up, guys. I can't think of anything at the moment, and I've thought about it a lot, and I still haven't come up with any conclusion that isn't either ridiculously powerful, making grappling the only thing anyone would ever want to do, or making it so useless that it doesn't actually make a difference to whether you want to grapple or not. So yeah, I haven't come to a conclusion on that point. The last rule is you can only take a long rest in a safe location. A safe location defined as you've had a day of food, you've got another day of food ready. Same with water. You've got shelter from the elements, and you've got a secure location from the environment. That can be guards keeping an eye out, but it can also be solid walls around you or something. It means you can play on a survival situation, and the party it can't just regain everything by going to sleep for 6 hours or 8 hours or whatever. It actually means the players search for materials. I tested it in the new campaign I have, and it worked a treat. The players spent a good while trying, okay, we've got to explore, we've got to get the right amount of equipment, we've got to make sure we bring home firewood, wherever our camp is, okay, we've got to make sure that we can get our exhaustion points back, because that last combat we were in was harsh. It's nice because you get a lot more exhaustion points. You end up having to the damages, while you might regain all your hit points, you obviously only regain 1 exhaustion point per long rest, and so the injury, the damages you receive can feel like they're lasting quite a long time. You know, four rests, 4 solid good rests are needed to recover from a really nasty battle. That sort of thing. It works well. It works well. My players enjoy it, though it limits the super ability of the long rest, because the long rest is clearly overpowered, and in this case it's been dealt with, at least somewhat. It works well. What can I say? I'm a nerdy teen who makes all his games around the rules rather than the rules around the game. But no, everyone seems to be having fun. I can only build off knowledge that an 18-year-old has. So if you're like, do what fits for you. But I just thought I'd say these are my gritty rules. These are why I think they work, and why you should probably not do them in most games. But yeah, that's me done. Hit all those buttons down below. Send this off everywhere. Share it left, right, and centre. I'm going to do all those YouTuber things where I start to boast about my own abilities. But yeah, I like watching the big numbers go up, so do it if you would. And I will see you some other time. Awkwardly sign off. And yes, I was playing with a piece of metal and a screwdriver. I don't know why. I get far too preoccupied with useless things.